Welcome to the program at 7:08 exactly. We do apologize for that slight technical hitch, and we are now joined by Carl Niehaus. We do obviously know that he was a former veteran of the MKMVA movement. He joined the party and the ANC 39 years ago, I understand. No, I beg your pardon, 43 years ago as a 19-year-old activist. And after that many years, he now has decided that he's going to break away from the party and going to start his own movement. And let's understand if that is going to be a political party or a movement with a purpose. Carl Niehaus, a very good morning to you and all the very best for the year 2023. You seem to be starting on the right footing. Congrats. And we do hope it's going to pan out exactly as you plan for it to pan out. Welcome to the program. And obviously, you have a story to share with us why and how it has come to this point.
Good morning and thanks for having me. Let me also extend my best wishes to yourself and to your listeners for
Thank you
a
indeed.
great new year.
Thank you.
I hope that we will have a better year than the past year, which was really disastrous in South Africa. You have correctly narrated that I have, after 43 years, finally decided to call it an end with the African National Congress. I did not do so with joy. I did that in great sadness because one doesn't join a liberation movement with the intention to leave. You join with the intention to stay. But I found myself in a situation where the ANC had betrayed its own liberation ideals to such an extent under especially this Cyril Ramaphosa administration, and especially the betrayal of radical economic transformation that is required to bring full liberation in South Africa, that ultimately I could no longer see my way open to be part of such a sellout process. And that is the main reason why I finally decided that I will not proceed with my appeal against the very farcical expulsion that was brought against me. And I decided that it is now time to go in a different direction. Let me just emphasize, this movement is not my movement. It is going to be a movement for radical economic transformation grounded in the people and also amongst comrades who are members of the ANC, but who believe very strongly in the continuation of pursuing radical economic transformation and full liberation in South Africa.
Okay, so this seems to have been in abeyance for a very, very long time.
Mm.
Let's understand, Carl, when we talk about this not being a political a move, you saying that it's
Political
not going to be
party.
a political
Political movement it
party,
certainly is,
but
but
a
not a
movement. So,
political party.
what
That
is
is,
the difference? What is the difference, Carl?
well, a political movement means that anyone from all political parties, including also those members of the ANC who identify with radical economic transformation, can be part of this movement. Of course, once one creates a political party, it becomes more difficult for members of other political parties to be part of such a party. In fact, they will have to make a choice. Now that we talk about a movement, that choice is not required. You don't need to lead a party, but you do commit yourself to a movement for radical economic transformation, which I believe is critically necessary in South Africa if we want to see at all any hope for the people of this country to become liberated from the current white monopoly capitalist strangle grip that we find ourselves in.
So, Carl, starting a movement like this, and you've also indicated that you welcome anyone from the ANC to become a part of the movement. would that mean that they would have to then resign from the ANC to become a part of the movement? That's question number one. Number two, will you be able to represent the movement in Parliament? Because if not, I kind of wonder at whether you'll have any voice at all. And then I'd like you to understand what are the implications, possibly the challenges, and also the benefits of pushing forward radical economic transformation?
Okay, well, those are three questions. Let me start with the first one. Uh, I've explained that since it is a movement and not a registered political party, members of all political parties who feel that they can share in those ideals for radical economic transformation can be part of this movement. And that includes members of the ANC, and they will not have to resign their membership of the African National Congress, except, of course, if the dictatorial tendencies in the ANC again raises its ugly head and people are forced to resign or forced to make a choice. I fear that under the new Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, who has been talking like he's going to be an inquisitor and enforcer of the law, and that he will make sure that people toe the party political line, that he will not allow freedom of speech and expression. I fear that those kind of things may happen. But hopefully, a movement will allow people from all political parties who feel that they associate with radical economic transformation to be part of it. Of course, until one is registered as a political party, you will not be able to participate in elections and will not have representatives in parliament. So that is part of where we find ourselves now. But as I've said, we are in consultation. We are talking. This is a process. It is a work in progress. And it may eventually evolve into a political party. None of us are actually excluding that possibility. It is just that at this stage, we have not reached the point where we say, okay, we're going to register a political party. The third question that you asked was about radical economic transformation. Now, all of us have seen what is going on in South Africa. You've seen the huge gap between the rich and the poor growing. You've seen South Africa becoming the most unequal society in the world. We know that for young people in this country, it is a life without a clear horizon. There are more than 43% of young people, including educated young people, graduates, who are unemployed and who have no prospect of getting jobs. All of this is in the context of the new liberal economic policies that the African National Congress has followed over the last almost 29 years. Those new liberal economic policies have failed dismally. They've plunged us into this terrible economic crisis that I've just described. And the only way to get out of it is to take fundamental and radical decisions about the change of the economic direction in which we find ourselves. So the issue of the return of the land to the people, expropriation of land without compensation, the nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank, the creation of a state bank that will make cheaper capital available for new entrepreneurs, especially in the African and in the Black communities. All of those issues cannot be done by tinkering with new liberal economic policies. It's not going to happen through some kind of miraculous trickle-down theory that wealth from the rich will eventually trickle down to the poor. There has to be a fundamental transformation of the economic structure in this country, and there has to be a loosening and eventually full release of the grip of white monopoly capitalism as it is existing in our country. And those will be the benefits of radical economic transformation, because it will create new opportunities for the majority of Black and especially African poor. It will help to put land, which is at the foundation, at the essence of our liberation, in the hands of our people. And it will make it possible for Black and African people to scale the economic heights of this economy and be able to control their own economic destiny. So those are the hopes that we have. And we believe very strongly that those hopes can only materialize through a radical transformation of the current economic system that we have in South Africa.
We also have a situation regarding all of the unmet and broken promises by the ruling party
Mm,
regarding very especially the poorest of the poor, the Black rural, not only in the rural areas, but all around the world. You've mentioned a astronomical figure of above 43% of youth unemployment. And that all adds to the high crime levels that we see in the country as well. The
yeah.
destitution, the despair that we're seeing. And this obviously goes right back to the large scale corruption that has been going on by the ruling party. People, young people, especially older rural folk, also kind of have this mindset that once RET is introduced, that everything's going to come for free: housing, road infrastructure, water, electricity, medical aid or medical services, etc. How do you actually make them understand that things will not necessarily come for free? What exactly is involved and what RET means? So you're going to be distributing land to the poorest of the poor. How is that distribution going to happen where we see the right people, the neediest of the needy, the people that probably land was taken away from their forefathers and the land rightfully needs to go to them? And will they be in a position to work the land and become self-sufficient?
Look, I think it is wrong to say that the majority of South Africans simply have an idea that radical economic transformation will be a freebie for them. I don't believe that. What I do believe is that the majority of South Africans want to see the state being far more involved in transforming this economy. Therefore, for the state to be involved in the nationalization of land, but during the process of that nationalization, also to work with the people to imbue in them the necessary skills to be able to use the land in a way that will be useful and in a way that will grow their own financial strength and stability. That can be done. It has been done in countries such as Vietnam, in China, in many other societies, and it is not true that the fundamental transformation of the economic model, also through direct state involvement, is necessarily going to lead to a situation where people think that they do not need to work for the change that has to come. People will participate in this work. They will participate in changing their lives if the opportunities are given to them to be able to do so. But we live in a society today which is deprived of opportunity. The majority of Black South Africans, also those people in the villages and in the rural communities that you refer to, feel helpless and hopeless because there is no creation of an environment in which they can empower themselves. There's no hope for them to be able to have access to the land. There's no hope for them to be able to get trained in order to be able to work that land and make a living from it. They don't see that hope. They are simply at the mercy of these big white monopoly capitalist companies and the big white monopoly capitalist farming system that we have in South Africa. And I repeat to you again, it is not correct to say that this model of a change in the economy and a transformation of the economy will necessarily fail as the monopoly capitalists and the free marketeers try to tell us. There are good examples of what has happened in China, what has happened in Vietnam, what has happened in many other countries which has empowered the majority of the people, has given them new hope. And with that hope also came the preparedness from the side of the people to bring their part to work, to not expect freebies, but to create an environment in which they can empower themselves. But what needs to be done is that the state has a critical role to play in order to open those opportunities for the majority of poor in this country. And that process needs, as a very bare minimum, a preparedness to be pro-poor. The current party that we have in the African National Congress, the manner in which it has become a neoliberal party, means that it no longer has that pro-poor disposition. And that is the most fundamental failure and the most tragic betrayal that the African National Congress has committed.
Carl, are you not wary of the fact that perhaps something like this could be open to corruption as well?
Of course, corruption can be anywhere. But what we need to do is to make sure that whatever movement comes about is going to be accountable to proper accounting structures and accountable to the people. But you see, the problem that I have with corruption is the way in which the imperialist powers, the Western powers, the white monopoly capital defines corruption as if it is only something that happens in the Black and African communities, and as if it is something that only happens within the state. That is fundamentally wrong. In the process of corruption, the big monopoly companies plays a central role in corrupting states and in corrupting communities. And we need to look at how that process unfolds itself also if we want to deal with the issue of corruption. We must not use this concept of corruption in the way that the West uses it in order to undermine the self-worth of the majority of Black African people and simply create an impression that people of African and of Black descent are inherently corrupt. They are not. And the corruption that we need to fight fundamentally in this world, ultimately in this world, is corruption from the huge capitalist monopoly companies. If you look at the relationship, for instance, that France has with the former colonies in Africa, it's a fundamentally corrupt relationship. If we look at the relationship that the United States has with many countries throughout the world, it's a fundamentally corrupt relationship. There are companies in France that can even get tax rebates for the corrupt bribes that they pay in African countries in order to be able to continue to exploit the majority of Africans. These are the kind of things that we need to talk about, rather than just this overall generalized discussion about corruption, which isn't really very helpful in taking us forward and addressing the real issues concerning corruption.
You make some very, very salient points then. One then realizes that RET is probably long overdue in the country. I'm trying to figure out how you're going to start rolling it out. And do you have perhaps a 3 or a 5-year plan? How soon would you like to see things happening? And what would be the biggest starting point for this to start rolling out and for you as the movement?
Well, of course, the movement will have to gain support. It will have to become a movement that cannot be ignored. It has to have numbers because we need to fight this current ruling regime and the way in which this regime has undermined any hope for radical economic transformation. It is quite easy to start the process for radical economic transformation. We can just go and have a look at what the original radical economic transformation resolutions are that had been taken by the African National Congress when it still had the inclination to be a party that is pro-poor. The return of the land to the people, it is possible to do that process without compensation. We know what needs to be done. We know that we need to change the Constitution. We know that we need to transform Section 25 of the Constitution. It is not a massively difficult thing to nationalize the South African Reserve Bank. We've been told a lot of stories about how massively expensive it is going to be to get rid of the current private shareholders in the Reserve Bank. It is not true. It is a lie. The amount of money that is required to nationalize the South African Reserve Bank is minuscule within the context of the whole South African economy. And in that process, when you take those initial decisions, you start moving on a footing where you empower the states to be able to take the right decisions, to use the South African Reserve Bank, for example, not just as a manner in which you control inflation and inflation targeting, but also as an instrument of growth in our economy. And you take financial decisions that release money into the economy that will help to develop growth. All of these things are possible. They are not rocket science, but you need the political will in order to be able to do so. And currently, that political will is absent within the African National Congress because it has become captured by the big captains of industry, by white monopoly capitalism. So the big challenge that we have, and that is the one that we are dealing with in terms of all these consultations and discussions around a movement for radical economic transformation, is to make sure that radical economic transformation becomes so popular, becomes so generally accepted, becomes so searched and looked after and campaigned for, that it will become impossible to ignore it, and it will become impossible not to implement a radical economic transformation program.
Carl, that's all we have time for. It sounds like the answer to the problems and the challenges that we South Africans are facing. I wish you good luck with it, and I do hope that you start rolling it out sooner rather than later. And all the very best for the formation of the new movement. God bless and go well.
Thank you. I hope that your listeners and everyone here are speaking about this very, very critical issue for our country. We'll also throw in their weight and support, because when you talk about a movement, you need to have it as a popular movement based in civil society, based in the populace of the country, and numbers are of the greatest importance. Thank you so much.
Good day to you, sir. 8:30 exactly, news and views on Salam Media. Standing by to talk with us is my colleague, media personality, journalist, obviously, and that, of course, is Faisal Patel.
Humanity sets the agenda.
There's no smell that takes me back to the comfort of my childhood than the smell of black seed oil being applied by my nanny. Now I'm using tib black seed in my own home to soothe sniffles and coughs, to help with digestion and immunity, and of course, as part of my beauty routine. After all these years, I've come to appreciate the wisdom in finding comfort and shifa in trusted treatments like tib black seed. You can find tib black seed at all leading pharmacies, or find out more at blackseed.co.za.
Devastating floods in Pakistan have washed away villages, claimed the lives of more than 1,000 people, damaged nearly 1 million homes, and left over 33 million people in desperate need of help. As the catastrophe unfolds, Islamic relief is on the ground, reaching people